Okay, so let's get started. In grade 6, we learn to arrange chords. We learn to arrange progressions, a sequence of chords. So, I'm going to assume that everybody knows grade 5 well. Let's take it back to the key of C major. Let's take it back to chord 1 in C major. There you go. Now let's recall the primary triads. Primary triads in all keys are 1, 4, 5. Let's record primary triads in C major. Chord 1, chord 4, and chord 5, which you should know in C major are. Chord 1 is C major. Chord 4 is F major. And chord 5 is G major. Good. So this is stuff that you should know. Right. Now, a chord played like this. A chord played like this. It's nice and neat. 3 notes only. Close to each other, stacked in thirds, which is fine. Now, in real life, they happen differently. So these notes could be elsewhere. The C, the E, the G, root third and fifth might be displaced differently. That's what we're going to learn. So, for example, if this bass note, if this C there is down there, see, that is still chord 1 in root position, right? It could go lower. As long as the C is at the very bottom, it's still chord 1 in root position. Now, same goes for the top notes. You see, if I take the E, the third, and I put it there, still chord 1 in root position, and so on. Now take chord 4. This is a nice, neat chord 4, a triad in close position. Now, I might move these notes and put them elsewhere. Say that I put the A there, up there. You see, still 4 in root position. Let me lower the bass. There you go. That's still chord 4 in root position. So this is what we're going to do in this chapter. We're going to learn to arrange static chords. Just one chord taken apart, doesn't move, doesn't do anything. We're going to learn how to arrange it. Now we're going to learn to arrange chords for 4 voices, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. And those are the approximate ranges of those 4 voices. Those might change. I see them change. I see them differently from textbook to textbook, from piece to piece. But let's take those. Now, you remember all this from grade 5. By the way, you should remember all this from grade 5. A soprano and alto go in the top staff, and tenor and bass go in the bottom staff. You remember all that. Open score, and this is closed score, which is what we're going to be working with. Now, here's something to remember. Here's something to remember, something important. There's 3 notes in a triad, and we have to arrange for 4 voices. So 1 note needs to happen twice. 1 note needs to happen twice. Now, at this stage, it's safe to repeat the root or to repeat the fifth. And it's called doubling. So it's safe to double the root or to double the fifth, but we do not double the third at this stage. Now you see in that example, what I do, this is chord 1 in root position, and I have a root in the bass and a root in the soprano. So I double the root in that example. Now I could have done this, and now you see I have doubled the fifth. I have the fifth in the tenor and another fifth in the soprano. And still good voicing. Everything is, all the voices are within an octave, less than an octave between each other. Okay? So it's okay to double the root. It's okay to double the fifth. Yeah, now as I mentioned there, another rule to remember is about spacing. It's about spacing. So how far apart the notes of the chord could be. Now, generally speaking, soprano, alto, alto and tenor within an octave. So no farther than an octave in soprano, alto and tenor, adjacent voices. Tenor and bass can spread farther than an octave. So we spoke about what it's okay to double. So what it's okay to have twice, the root and the fifth. Now let's also mention what it's not okay to get rid of. So when arranging a chord, we can get rid of the fifth if we want. So it's okay to have a chord with no fifth. You see, I have C, C, E, C, no G. That's fine. But if I get rid of the third, it immediately sounds empty. It sounds just empty. Listen to the difference. So for now, again, just a rule at face value. It's okay to get rid of the fifth, but it's not okay to get rid of the third. Now, I give you guys a little bit of practice. So right there you go. Right there, I give you soprano and bass, so the outside voices of the C major chord in root position. And what you need to do, you need to fill in the tenor and the alto, so the inside voices, keeping in mind the rule that we discussed. We need the third. We can get rid of the fifth. And these voices, these chord notes, need to be within an octave of each other, except the tenor and bass, which could spread further. So take the first one there. Take the first one there. Take this one. Take that. C in the bass, E in the soprano. Okay, so I have to put the rest inside. So I have one root, I have the third. Now I think I can only have this in the alto and that in the tenor. I can't have anything else, because I cannot go above the E and I cannot go below the C. The alto and the tenor have to be inside the soprano and the bass. So that's actually my only option. I cannot have this one, because otherwise I would be doubling the third, which we don't do at this stage. Let's take another example. Let's take the one that spread a lot. Let's take that one. That one there. What would I do there? I have this one, the C in the bass again, and that G. Now, these are a lot more spread apart, so I'm going to have to spread everything apart. I'll have another root here in the alto, and I am going to have the third here in the tenor. Now the software puts it in the treble clef, and I can't change that, but that should really be in the bass clef with 2 ledger lines. And so on. So practice filling in the alto and the tenor in this exercise. Then you have the same exercise for chord 4, for the F major chord. Then you have the same exercise for chord 5, for the G major chord. Next up, I only give you the bass. Next up, I only give you the bass, so you have a little bit more choice. You have a little bit more choice as to how to displace the top note. But I suggest you start with the soprano anyway. So filling the outside voices. Start with the soprano. Now, if you put the soprano there, for example, now I have a root, I have a third, Now I can decide, I'll have another root here in the tenor, and my alto will be here. There you go, that's a good arrangement. That's that. And so on. What's the next one? The next one is that G in the bass, which means that it's chord 5. It means that it's chord 5. We're only dealing with chords in root position. So that's chord 5. How do I arrange chord 5? Let's say that I want to have the third in the soprano. I am going to have then this, another root in the alto, and the tenor is going to have the 5th. Again, that D should be in the bass clef with one ledger line, but the software isn't letting me do that. Okay. So to recap, we have harmonized chord 1, 4, and 5. Initially, the soprano and the bass were given, and you fill in tenor and alto. And just now, only the bass was given, so it gives you a little bit more choice. Now, next up, we harmonize the soprano. So we have to add the alto, the tenor, and the bass. Start with the bass, and then work the voice in between. Remember the rules. You can double the root, you can double the 5th. You don't double the 3rd, but you do not get rid of the 3rd either. While we're working with all root positions, the bass note, for now, it's only the root, but any upper voice, any upper note can be the root, the 3rd, or the 5th of the chord. So if you have a soprano line, if you have a soprano note, say G, now that note can be a couple of things. That note can be the 5th of C major, or it can be the root of G major. So you have to think of what your options are. You see, you have to think, what does that note belong to? What does that note belong to? You see, another example, a C note. A C note in the soprano can be the root of C major, or it can be the 5th of F major. So you have to do this kind of thinking when you have a soprano line and you have to put chords underneath, which is, by the way, question 1 of a grade 6 associated board paper. So let's take it step by step. And rather than, you see, I give you all the options in the handout. In the key of C major, all those notes in the soprano and what they belong to, just for demonstration. But don't memorize that as a set of rules, because you'll fry your brain with rules, right? You're better off asking yourselves questions and do the thinking for yourselves. You have a note in the soprano. Ask yourself, which chord does this note belong to? Now remember, you're only dealing with the primary triads. You're only dealing with 1, 4, and 5. So you know your chords, you know your key, you know the notes that make up those chords. And if you don't, go back to grade 5. And then you have to ask yourself, which chord does this note belong to? Could it belong to more than one chord? Yes or no? It might not. And is this note the root, the 3rd, or the 5th of these chords? There's a little bit of practice there to do in that respect, so do it. Page 6. And yeah, I mean, from there onward, I just provide lots of opportunities to practice. So first of all, I give you notes in the soprano, and you have to fill in bass, alto and tenor. Then practice in a lot of different keys. You see, in the key of G major. And initially, I remind you guys of the primary triads. See? I remind you all of the primary triads for each key that we're working with, so that you can check if you remember your primary triads well. Key of E major, you see? Now, and I get as far as 5 sharps and flats. Now, in the grade 6 workbook here, in the grade 6 workbook, they say that the question is not likely to exceed 4 sharps or flats, but not likely to doesn't mean that it's not going to. So I got as far as 5 sharps or flats. So soprano line, harmonize up to 5 sharps or flats. Then I give you bass line. There you go. From page 9 onwards, harmonize the bass. Well, not a line. Sorry, it's wrong. It's not wrong. It's not right to talk about a line now, because they are individual chords. It's not a line. It's notes. We're not talking about lines yet. Harmonize the following bass notes, adding the soprano first and then alto and tenor. And as you can see, I do that in a few different keys. But this time I stop reminding you guys of the primary triads, because I want to hope that you have them memorized. Okay? So, thanks for listening. Download the handout and do this bit of practice. These are only static chords, just primary triads in root position. Harmonize the soprano voice, adding bass, tenor and alto. Harmonize the bass voice, adding soprano and the inside voices. Okay, so just one last couple of things, how to use the handout. At the end of the handout, you have practice time. See? Practice time in few different keys. Let me make that smaller. There. Practice time in few different keys. Harmonize the following soprano notes by adding bass first, etc. Now, the first one is in the key of C, then there's a few different keys. Key of G major. Next one is in G major. See that? So in your mind, at the mention of G major, in your mind, a new key happens and you have new primary triads. So in this case, you have G major, chord 1, C major, chord 4, and D major, chord 5. New primary triads. So what's the first note now? First that you got to harmonize is G. There, so you have that in the soprano, right? You have G in the soprano, you're now in the key of G. So you ask yourselves, what chord does that note belong to? Well, in the key of G, it's the root of G major, but it could also be the 5th of C major. It's either the root of 1 or the 5th of 4. Once that's clear in your mind, then you voice the chord, you arrange the chord. So let's have it simple. Let's have a G in the bass, and there you go. I double the root, and the tenor is gonna have the third, and the alto is gonna have the fifth. There you go. So let's take another one, still in the key of G. Let's take that B up there. You ask yourself the question, what does that B note belong to? Which chords does that belong to in the key of G? Well, in the key of G, that note can only be the third of chord 1. So I have chord 1, G major. The bass is gonna take that. My soprano is up there on the B. The alto is going to take the fifth. And my tenor is gonna double the root. Now again, that tenor should be in the bass clef, but the software isn't doing it. So that's how you use the handout. That's how I want to use the handout. And you see, I remind you guys of the primary triads in each key so that there's no room for mistake. At the mention of a key, those 3 chords should just pop in your brain, like if you're opening a drawer. Say, for example, okay, let's go ahead, let's go key of E major. Key of E major, there you go. Let's change the key in the software as well. 4 sharps, key of E major. Say, there is a G sharp there in the soprano. Right there, we'll have a go at this one. So that's my soprano voice. So a G sharp in the key of E major can only be the third of E major, of chord 1. So let's give it a bass. Let's give it an alto, doubling the root. Let's give it a tenor. There you go. Chord 1. In the second section of the exercises, then I give you bass notes. I give you the bass notes. That's it. Harmonize the following bass notes. Okay, let's go back. This is in the key of G major. Let's have a go at that one. Actually, let's have a go at that one. So it's a low D. So because it's root position chords, that can only be chord 5 in G major. So it's chord 5 is a D major chord. Let's give it a soprano, an alto, doubling the root, and a fifth in the tenor. That's how you use the handout. I hope that helps.